The advice you actually follow costs $5 a day. The decision that decides your net worth got 11 minutes in a dealership parking lot. You know the drill, you canceled the streaming subscriptions, you have a chest freezer in the garage for bulk chicken, you own a label maker, and you have labeled things that did not need labeling. You have been careful for years, in exactly the ways you were told, and you are about to sign something at 6.58% that nobody has asked you one hard question about. So, meet three people who did everything they were told. Julie, who owns that label maker, Otis, who carries a $2,000 balance on purpose because it builds credit from the seat of a truck he has to hoist himself into, and Andrea, who has $50,000 in savings and the best reason to wait you have heard. None of them are careless, all of them are following instructions. Somebody is watching your change jar very closely. Nobody is watching the vault. My name is Nick, and I spend an unreasonable amount of my life reading the footnotes of studies that everybody quotes and nobody opens. If you have ever done everything right with money and still felt like you were quietly losing ground, hit subscribe, because today we are going through the biggest myths in personal finance and working out what each one has already cost you. Here is the filter to hold for the next 20 minutes. A myth does not survive because it is wrong. Plenty of wrong things die quietly. A myth survives because it is cheap to repeat and because somebody eats when you repeat it. And the cheapest advice to hand you is always advice about small money, because small money is where you already feel guilty. So look at where your money actually goes, not where you get lectured about it going. In the 2024 Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the average American household spent $78,535. Housing took 33.4%. Transportation, 17%. Add those together and you are at half of everything you earn before buying a single thing you would call yours. Food was 12.9, entertainment was 4.6. Now, that is a mean, not a median, and I will keep flagging that because means get dragged up by the households at the top. Treat it as a shape, not as your life. But the shape held across every income group. Poorest fifth, $35,000 a year. Richest fifth, $150,000. Same shape. So here is the arithmetic of this industry. Half your money goes to two decisions. Almost every piece of advice you have ever received is aimed at the other half. Not a conspiracy, just much easier to write 100 articles about your coffee than one honest article about your truck. And one thing before we start, because it wrecked my outline, one myth on this list turns out to be true. Arithmetically, verifiably true. It has just been aimed at the wrong target for 20 years, and I will come back to it. Start with Otis because his myth dies fastest. Carrying a small balance does not build your credit. It never did. A US News survey found 48% of Americans believe it does. Half the country paying a monthly fee for a service that was never switched on. Here is how your score works. Payment history, 35%. Amounts owed, mostly your utilization, another 30%. Your utilization is your statement balance divided by your limit. So when you carry a balance, you raise the number you were trying to lower, then get billed for the effort. FICO says so in its own documentation. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau lists it as a myth outright. What Otis needed was an open card with low reported utilization, and he gets that by paying in full. That is the trick. Instead, the Federal Reserve puts the average rate on cards assessed interest at 22.15%. On his $2,000, that is about $443 a year. Forever, think about what that is. A gym membership he never uses, for a gym that does not exist, and going would make him less fit anyway, not reckless. Obedient, Julie's myth costs more, and people get emotional about it, so stay with me. Renting is not throwing money away. Renting is buying housing. So is owning. Either way, you are buying housing. The only question is what the numbers look like on the street you are standing on. And here is the part that upsets people. American housing as an asset is unremarkable. Shiller's long series and the quality-adjusted Case-Shiller Index both put real home price growth near 0.5% a year across more than a century. 0.5% after inflation. Long-run real returns on American stocks sit near 6.7. Since 1995, home prices are up about 310%, the S&P 500 about 2,200. 0.5% a year is a houseplant that grows one leaf a decade and still expects watering every Saturday. And that comes before the costs nobody puts in your listing. Property tax, 1 to 2% of value annually, maintenance, another 1%. Every year, forever, insurance, which has gone from boring to openly hostile, now averaging close to $2,370 a year, up 70% in 5.5 years. Then 2 to 5% closing costs going in, 6 on the way out. At 6.58%, Julie's first years are almost entirely interest, which is rent. She pays rent to a bank instead of a landlord and calls it ownership because that is the vocabulary she was handed. The old rule said 5 years to break even on transaction costs. At today's rates, analyses across the 50 biggest metros put it closer to 10. Julie is moving in 4. Now, you are thinking, but Nick, homeowners are richer than renters. And you are right. They are. I hate to be the bearer of complicated news, but not because housing is a great asset. Because a mortgage is a savings plan you cannot skip, it freezes your housing cost against inflation, and it eventually ends, which is worth an enormous amount when you are 70. Renters who invest the difference beat owners. Renters who do not lose, and most people do not. So that is a real argument for buying. A behavioral one, not a financial one. Just not the argument anybody made to Julie. Which brings us to Andrea, who does the most responsible looking thing in this video and pays the most for it. Andrea has her $50,000 and a note on her phone. A list of price targets, levels where she will buy in. She has been updating it for 2 years. She is not lazy and not scared. She is careful. Careful is what costs her. All-time highs are not a warning light. They are the resting state of a functioning market. Since 1950, about 7% of trading days closed at a record, and in the 2020s, closer to 12, and the returns from them are insultingly normal. Since 1928, the median one-year gain after an all-time high is 9.6%. After a day that was not a record, 9.5. 9.6 versus 9.5. That is your penalty for buying at the top. There isn't one. Vanguard ran lump sum against dollar cost averaging from 1976 to 2022. Investing everything at once won about 68% of the time, and both destroyed what you are doing right now, holding cash. But here is what Andrea's note cannot account for. The market's best days live inside its worst months. Ned Davis research found roughly 76% of them happen during a bear market or the first 2 months of a new bull. The good days hide inside the bad ones. So waiting for calm guarantees you are in cash when the money gets made. Andrea is not waiting at the bus stop. She is standing where the bus already left, checking the schedule. Over the 30 years ending 2024, an investor who missed only the 30 best days dropped from 8.4% annualized to 2.1. 30 days out of roughly 7,500, her 50,000 earns the FDIC national average savings rate 0.38%. 10 years of that is about 51,900. 10 years at 7% is about 98,000. Her caution costs $46,000. And she will never see it. No statement mentions it. Opportunity cost is the only expense in your life that arrives with no receipt and no one to be angry at. And now let me turn on my own industry, because there is a number that has frightened Andrea for a decade and does not survive contact. You have heard that the average investor earns 2.9% while the market makes 10%. That is a Dalber study people have quoted since roughly the Obama administration. The problem is the arithmetic. Wade Pfau reverse engineered it and showed it compares somebody investing gradually against a benchmark that got all its money on day one. Michael Eadisess was blunter. He said the math is wrong. And Dalber's current numbers? For 2025, the average equity investor earned 17.16% against the index's 17.88%. a gap of 0.72 points. Not 7, 0.72. Behavior gaps are real, they are just not biblical. And the biblical version was sold to you by people who charge a fee to stand between you and it. By the way, I opened a school community where I break this stuff down properly the way I would if we were sitting across a table, and where I show you how to build income that does not depend on your employer's mood, even if you are starting from zero. The link is below, back to it, because that fee is not small. That fee is the third door in the vault. The myth is that a professional picking your investments beats a dumb index fund you could buy yourself. And the evidence against that is so lopsided it is almost rude. S&P's Spiva scorecard found 79% of large cap active funds lost to the S&P 500 in 2025. And across 22 categories of American equity funds over 15 years, the number where most active managers beat their benchmark was 0. 0, not a small number. 0, and Spiva counts the funds that quietly closed along the way, which most studies do not. That is the honest version. And this is the cruel part for Andrea. The same industry telling her to wait for the right moment cannot find the right fund with 15 years and a research budget. Active wins in pockets for a year, never persistently, which matters because you have to pick the winner in advance, and in advance is the only tense that is hard. And Julie has one of these. So do you, probably 500,000, 30 years, 7% gross. In an index fund at 0.03%, you finish with about 3.81 million, paying 1% about 2.99 million. That 1 percentage point takes $820,000 from you. Julie has never seen that number. Julie has color-coded her grocery list, and you never feel it. Nothing gets taken. A thief takes something you had, and you notice, and you call someone. This takes what you were going to have. There is no crime scene, just a smaller future that shows up on schedule, which is exactly the trick Otis's truck runs on him. Otis believes buying new is the responsible choice. Reliability, warranty, doing it properly. Experian puts the average new car payment near $770 a month, used near $531. And 20.3% financing new now pay over $1,000, highest share on record. Over a third of new loans run past 6 years, a loan that outlives the owner's interest in the car. Now watch his payment become something else. $767 a month at 7% for 30 years is about $935,000. And you are thinking, Nick, that is nonsense. You cannot invest a car. Correct, so be fair to Otis. Compare him to a version of himself in a reliable used vehicle at $300 a month. The gap is $467. Over 30 years, that alone is about $570,000. That is not a car payment. That is a house bought in installments and then set on fire. And nobody stops him, because nobody in that building is paid to. The finance manager is not compensated for talking him into something cheaper. Neither is the manufacturer. And the advertising Otis has swum in since he was 9 was never selling transportation. It sold him a version of himself, and it is very good at its job. Otis is not stupid. Otis is outnumbered. Let me stop the numbers because I think you already know all this, and knowing it has not helped. Here is what these myths feel like. Not on a spreadsheet. On a Tuesday. It feels like doing math in the cereal aisle. It feels like your card getting declined for $11 in front of a teenager who does not care, but you will think about it for a week. It feels like putting your kid's field trip form on the counter and leaving it there for 4 days. It feels like hearing a new noise from the engine and turning the radio up. It feels like a savings account you deposit into faithfully and cannot look at. It feels like being $1,200 away from disaster while making decent money and having no one you can say that to. And it feels like doing everything right. That is the part nobody writes about. Julie labels her freezer shelves. Otis paid an extra $40 for the good oil. Andrea has never once panic sold. These are not weak people. They are competent adults being audited on the change jar while the vault stands open behind them. And one more before the last door, because this one is pure fear, and fear makes you sit still. Social Security is not disappearing. The 2025 Trustees Report has the retirement fund depleting in 2033, and at that point, payroll taxes still cover 77% of scheduled benefits. 77%, not zero. A serious policy problem and a completely different animal from the program vanishing. But believing it is gone pushes you to claim early out of panic, which cuts your benefit for life. The fear causes the loss. Andrea's problem in a different costume. There is one more door, and it is the quietest in the building. Otis got a call about this one on a Wednesday during a job. Somebody has told you life insurance can be an investment. Whole life, indexed universal life. The pitch is returns, plus a guaranteed death benefit, plus tax advantages, and every word of it is technically true. Here is what your pitch leaves out. A typical whole life policy pays between 80 and 100% of your entire first year premium to the person selling it. So your cash value in year one is approximately nothing. Congratulations, you have bought an investment whose first year return is a rounding error inside somebody else's commission. And that is not a defect. That is the design working correctly. The return on cash value over a multi-decade hold usually lands between 2 and 4%, which Morningstar found roughly bond-like. So, run it. The difference between a whole life premium and a term premium, call it $375 a month, invested at 7% for 30 years, is about $440,000. The whole life cash value on identical contributions gets you $220,000 for a death benefit that outlives your term policy. Permanent insurance has real uses. Estate liquidity. A dependent with special needs. Somebody who has exhausted every tax-advantaged account in existence. Those people are real. Just not most people, and definitely not Otis, on a roof holding a phone. Now, the open loop. The myth that turned out to be true. The latte factor is real. $5 a day is $1,825 a year, and at 7% over 30 years, that becomes about $184,000. A real number. I am not going to insult you by pretending otherwise, but hold it next to the others. 30 years of discipline, 30 years of small daily denial, 30 years of Julie's label maker. $184,000. Otis's one conversation about a truck was $570,000. Julie's one line on a statement she never opened was $820,000. The policy Otis got sold on that roof, $220,000, and Andrea, who did nothing wrong at all, is down $46,000 for the crime of being careful. The latte factor was never a lie, it was a redirection. It gave an industry something to say that cost them nothing, let them sound tough, and moved responsibility for a rigged structure into your kitchen where you sit with it alone at 11 at night. So if you are sitting there doing the mental subtraction, feeling behind, feeling like other people got a manual you never received, hear this properly. You are not bad with money. You were given advice optimized for being repeated, not for being true. You followed it. That was the responsible thing to do with what you had. You are not failing at this. You were handed a flashlight and pointed at the change jar. So point it at the vault instead, and you only have to do this once. Look at what you drive and how you paid for it. Look at what you live in and how long you are honestly staying, not how long you told yourself. Then go find the actual expense ratio on your retirement account, and I mean go look, because it is the cheapest $800,000 you will ever recover. And if anything in your life is sold as an investment, but arrives in an envelope from an insurance company, read it again. 4 things. One afternoon, Julie keeps the chest freezer, Otis keeps the good oil. Andrea keeps her note, she just stops obeying it. And you can drink whatever you want in whatever size you want without apologizing to anybody for it again. I am not a financial advisor, and this is not financial advice. It is arithmetic, and arithmetic does not know your circumstances. If you want to dive deeper, check out our school community using the link below. But if you keep one thing from this, keep this. Before you accept any piece of money advice, ask who it costs nothing to give. Free advice is almost always aimed at your change jar. Nobody has ever put the vault in a headline.